Hello and welcome to F1OWC Podcast Live. I'm joined once again by three-time world champion Brandon Tanti. Welcome to the third episode of our podcast now, which has started to pick up some traction amongst our drivers and our followers within the paddock. How do you, first of all, see the reception of our podcast?
Well, it's been wonderful so far. It's been great to be a part of this podcast in itself. It's good to have, people listening in and getting a feel for what it's like within this league and, some of the race we've had, some of the history. It's lovely. It's lovely to share some of that knowledge that we have with you guys. So
Yeah, I think it's really good. I think we're looking to get some of the drivers on the Friday podcast coming later this week. I know Shannon and Ryan have expressed interest in coming on board and sharing their experience in the F1OWC series. But we're on the eve of Season 12. We've fast-tracked it due to the coronavirus, as we're all aware from what we touched on in previous podcasts. You've managed to have some track time in the Renault. What's your take on the new chassis, and how does it compare to the Ferrari that you won your third championship in?
I think the transition's been pretty good so far. Done a fair bit of practice, over the past couple of days. It does feel a little bit different in some areas, but I think it's something that I can adapt to. I'm just actually looking forward to actually getting to race it, getting on track for the first official session of the season. So yeah, I'm excited.
Well, it's your first time using a Renault-powered chassis. You've only ever driven... oh no, apology. You did that season in Season 9 in the Red Bull. They were under the Renault, was that? Or they'd already gone to the Honda at that point?
No, I'm pretty sure that was their last season
with the Renault
engine.
Yeah. Now that it'll be interesting because Brian Cruz ended up walking away with a victory in Australia, which was really good for him. Are you looking to surpass his achievements obtained by him in Season 11? Do you have any expectations?
It's always have expectations to do well. But more so, I think I'm looking to, just make sure I'm still enjoying, what I'm doing and the races I'm, participating in. It's been fun up until this point, and I don't want it to stop being fun. So, even though towards the end of last season it was getting a bit stressful at times, but still maintaining a cool head and still enjoying it. So, yes. I'm excited. So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely shaping up to be a really good season. We're going to reflect on some of the Australian and Bahrain Grand Prix that have transpired previously in the F1OWC. Now, obviously, we'll start with the Australian Grand Prix. Now, I am only one of two drivers currently on the grid in Season 12 that were there in Season 1. Myself and Trent Fuller, who was the original series founder before it went through a rebrand into the F1OWC. We debuted Season 1. That race was won by Lee Keldoulis in the McLaren, which was really good. I actually endured a rather rocky start to my career. Qualified mid-pack at Australia and ended up walking away with a DNF due to some disconnections within the game. Traditionally, Australia has been challenging for me, a couple of podium finishes, but...
Sure, DNF in your first race would have been a hard pill to swallow.
Well, it's difficult because, joining a series, like I'd never done league racing prior to September of 2013 when I joined this league. So, you did your induction test and you kind of, did some career mode and you think you got the pace, but you don't really know where you are in the pecking order until you join the series. And I felt midway through the Australian Grand Prix that we just done our first pit stops, and obviously once the people in front pit, and I was expecting to potentially get maybe a podium, 4th place, but I was running in 6th at the time and it disconnected, and went on to happen at the next 3 events. So it was really challenging for myself starting my career and the season. We've seen in the past, and a good trend throughout majority of the seasons in the F1OWC, that the winner of the Australian Grand Prix right up to season 6, whoever won the Australian Grand Prix never went on to win the championship until Brian Cruz won it on his Mercedes debut after he replaced Peter Dongo, which was a good way to sort of break the duck. It still didn't help me achieve the top step of the podium, and hopefully 12 times the charm, and might be able to take Toro Rosso to the top step, but it would take an insane amount of luck. Looking at some of the race wins here, Brian Cruz, 4 race wins over his time in the F1OWC at Australia. Lee Keldoulis was the first person to go back or to win multiple Australian Grand Prix, because it had been won by a different person each season. And the weird thing is that, as we already established, that the person that traditionally won the Australian Grand Prix never went on to win the championship. Yeah, but we always found if we had rookie drivers join the series, that for some reason the Australian Grand Prix was just a hive for new people to come in and do really well. Obviously, you can't really count Lee Keldoulis because there had been no other races at that point. But we had Andrew Rumsey, the first British guy. He actually raced out of the UK for a bit, and then he moved to Queensland, and he did a couple of races at the start of Season 2 and Season 3. I went to the Top Gear Live event that they held in Sydney with him, so he was pretty good. He introduced me to the Elgato, and that's when I ended up picking up the Elgato for Season 3 to record my races. So he was one of a lot of that footage that you see from Season 2 that we do have is from Andrew's recorder, but he'd obviously rocked up. He did really well on his debut. Kane Hoggard at his Red Bull debut, he won, and it just become a hot spot for people to win races. Like Brian Cruz picked up his first race win of his career at Australia. It's just been really fantastic to see these mixed names. Obviously Peter Dongo, he picked up Chris Padajak. I remember that race in Season 3. It was raining, and we're going through, it was like the last lap of the race, and Jeff come on the radio and he's like, "Oh, the car ahead has run out of fuel." And I thought, "Oh yes, I'm sitting in P2. This is my chance to finally win the Australian Grand Prix." At that point, I'd won a lot of races at a lot of different tracks, and to get the call to say that the car ahead, has run out of fuel, bumped it up into rich fuel, and off I went, and I got onto the front straight. And it was literally a drag race to the finish line, and I could nearly reach out and touch the back of his car, and that's how close I come to winning the Australian Grand Prix, which is heartbreaking to say the least. But what are some of the memories that you can take away from racing at Albert Park, and obviously living in Melbourne yourself?
Well, there's been a few interesting races, even on my debut. I believe. My debut race at Australia in Season 7, I quite distinctly remember you getting spun around in Turn 1, unfortunately.
Yeah, I had a contact with my teammate at the time, I believe.
Yeah, there's been quite a few interesting races. I remember one particular race. I think it was either I'm pretty sure it was Season 9. Where Brian ended up going on to win it, but I was quite distinctively mowing him down for the final few laps, but ran out of laps essentially to catch him towards the end. I think that was when we had was 100% race.
Yeah, it was a 100% race, and it was a realistic engine performance as well.
Yeah. So that was a tough one. That was a tough one to.
We did really well to close him down in the Williams. Obviously, he was in the Mercedes, but obviously the Williams was a little bit underperformed compared to its 2014 chassis.
Mm.
15 podiums in that rookie season for yourself. Obviously set the stage for quite a decorated career to come in the F1OWC.
Oh, it was a great start. I think, I didn't have too many expectations at that point. I just really wanted to have some good, clean racing and, see where I sort of ended up. And, from Australia onwards, I think it was a really good season in itself. It was full of good results for me, and it really set myself up for the following seasons. I think, like season 8 and all the seasons past that up to this point. So there was a few tough ones. A particular Australia Grand Prix race, I'd say, season. I remember in season 10, Brian also won that one, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I believe I wasn't far off getting close to that win as well.
Yeah, it always seems to be that track that it's kind of, you can do really well, but you do need a decent amount of luck to pull it off. It's such a high-speed circuit; it's rather unforgiving if you do get it wrong.
It does, yeah. It requires a fair bit of concentration, especially if you, turn 11 and 12. You need to really concentrate on the lines you take through turn 8 because you can get a bit out of shape on the exit. There's some of the traction zones, if you're not ready for it, some of the curves can be a bit unforgiving. But if you maintain concentration, you do it in practice beforehand, you usually set yourself up pretty well. I think there's a bit of an element of luck as well, though. Probably unfortunate for me at some points in the race, maybe through the pit stop phase, or maybe some part of the strategy that didn't really go my way. But my experience has been relatively good, I think.
Lap record holder of the Albert Park Street circuit in the F1OWC back in season 10 with a 121 flat, set in the event qualifier, which was a format that we ran where we had practice, qualifying, and the event qualifier, which was basically to make sure that everyone was on the pace and that there was no people too far off the pace where they'd become a hazard. Ultimately, that time you set in season 10 survived the performance increase in season 11. How do you reflect on the chassis in season 10 compared to your time in the Ferrari in season 11?
I think maybe unpopular opinion, but I really enjoyed the cars. In season 10, I think it suited my driving style a bit more. To be a bit more aggressive when it came to turning in the car, because I really like to really chuck the car in, and feel it, and be stable on the power. I think it was a lot more forgiving when it came to traction out of corners compared to this current game we are on. But yeah, I think I enjoyed it a lot more, and I think doing a lap, in that generation of car felt, it felt a lot more rewarding. There was a few poles that I set in season 10. I look back on and I think, just wow, they just look so fast. Even though this current game you can go quicker, but it just felt fast.
Yeah, that's right. It'd be definitely good to get some content out there for the guys to have a look at a head-to-head comparison between, season 11, season 10, and and even earlier, to see that evolution of the cars, of the games, of the drivers. I know myself, I've gone through some, personal developments to improve my racing. The back end of my career has been very, up and down, fluctuates a lot in terms of having good seasons and bad seasons. I know season 9 was really good for me, season 10 not so much. I was pretty content with season 11, to be honest. Had an issue with the controller for the mid part of the season, which was a bit deflating. Cost me some good results, but I think at the end there, as we saw in Abu Dhabi, picking up that podium on my first race back on the wheel was really good, so I'm pretty happy with that. Looking at Bahrain, obviously we've changed our format for season 12. So we won't have a 2-day event, we'll have a single day event, and we're running them back to back. So we'll have Australia on Wednesday and then Bahrain on Thursday. So looking at the Bahrain circuit, the Bahrain International Circuit in Sakhir, debuted season 1, 5.4 kilometre circuit. I was one of the few drivers still on the grid to race there when they didn't have any floodlights, which was interesting. Obviously, there was a couple of variants. I think it was F1 between F1 2010 and 11, they changed the layout of the Bahrain track, but we didn't race there at that time. But we had 2 seasons in Bahrain in daylight conditions before they introduced the floodlights in season 4, which was season 3, which was a little different.
It would have been a big change, but I'm sure the racing in the floodlights feels uncomparable to during the day. I know we did a few practice sessions, during the day, but racing at night, the track actually feels like it comes to life a bit more.
Yeah, that's right, and it's definitely been something that they've improved on over the years. I know when they first brought out the floodlights in F1 2014, it looked like a bit of an afterthought in terms of how the track reflected and stuff under floodlights. And obviously, unlike Singapore, where there's a lot of buildings and a lot of signage and a lot of mirrors to get that reflection, Bahrain, you're out in the desert. There's nothing to reflect. So to try and get that sort of that atmosphere of racing under lights was a little tricky for them to pick up, and it took them some time to finally get it right. And I think in season 11 they've got it pretty close to what night racing should be. Season 1, obviously, as I mentioned before with Australia, I DNF due to disconnections. That was at where was it? Australia, Malaysia, because that was round 2, and then China, and then we rocked up at Bahrain, which was round 4. And obviously by this point, I got no points in the championship, and I was frustrated. Turning up 3 disconnections in a row, nothing to really show for my practice and effort that I put in. And then I rocked up in Bahrain, and they just brought a patch out the couple of days prior, and this is the first time I'd got to test it out in a public lobby or in a league lobby, and it held up. I got the pole position, and I thought, I got and it was quite convincing, actually, the pole position. Obviously, I put in a lot of practice, but to get that pole position, even if the race win didn't come my way, it was really fantastic to just prove to myself, hey, look, persevere through the bad times, and good results will come. Obviously went on to win that race, my first pole to win race in the F1OWC, and I went on a bit of a win streak in season 1. Season 2, Mitchell Collin won in his 3rd race in the F1OWC. He debuted in Malaysia, which I said was round 2. He did China, and then he rocked up in Bahrain, and he got his first race win for Williams. And then he went on a bit of a hat-trick, and he won Season 2, 3 and 4 for Williams Martini Racing. Obviously Season 3 winning the Drivers and Constructors Championship for himself and Chris Padajak. Then in Season 5, Brad Sweeten signed with Williams. He did one race at Abu Dhabi, the back end of Season 4, and he replaced Mitchell Collin, who was unable to continue on. And Brad Sweeten won the race for Williams Martini Racing. So there was 4 seasons there where Williams had dominated the deserts of Bahrain, despite the fact that Peter Dongo was hot favourite to get the pole and win the race nearly every time he
I was going to say, Peter's been a bit of a master of Bahrain without actually winning it so much.
Yeah, well, that's right. You look at the practice, and you look not really even at the qualifying. Like, he didn't really have that many pole positions at Bahrain, but for some reason, he was always the favourite to come out and just dominate the Bahrain Grand Prix, and it never happened. obviously I've returned one for Ferrari, become the first Ferrari-powered engine winner in Season 6, which was
Yep.
pretty good because it was my first win on the back of breaking my hand at the end of Season 5. So that was good to get the monkey off my back in that regards. And then Season 7, Brian Cruz, which races didn't he win, to be honest? He dominated that season for Mercedes.
Yeah.
And then Peter finally got his breakthrough, but he had to wait until Season 8 of the F1OWC where he drag raced Brian Cruz to the finish line, if I'm not mistaken, and it was under 10,000ths of a second at the finish line.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I do remember that. That was that was an exciting finish. I'm sure Peter was happy to finally get one.
Well,
get
yeah,
one in
that's
the bag.
right. His perseverance to hang around and compete at the top level for 8 seasons to finally get the win that has kind of escaped him over the previous, what was it, 4 or 5 years. It was good for him. Then obviously you, Season 9, Red Bull, returning to the top step of the podium in Bahrain for the first time since myself in Season 1. So that was a good little welcome home for Red Bull.
Yeah.
Season 10.
No. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. What were you saying?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, Bahrain particularly for me has been an interesting track. I've had a collection of it feels like mixed results, but maybe not 100% confident with the track in itself. There's a few tricky corners I've never seemed to get my head around, which I've practiced a bit more.
And then the downhill braking into that
turn 10.
Yeah, that turn 10, that left-hander hairpin onto that back straight. Probably one of the trickiest corners I've ever had to navigate in Formula 1, other than the penultimate corner at Malaysia, that off-camber, uphill, blind, right-hander. It was absolutely foul. It was the worst corner I've ever driven, and I don't think in the entire time that we'd been racing at Malaysia did I ever get that corner right. It was horrendous. Season 10, Luke Smith made his debut and won the race for Alfa Romeo, which was good for them. Their first race win under a new entrant as Alfa Romeo. Lap record stands at a 1:26.1, which again survived Season 11 despite a development in chassis and car was unable to surpass that lap time, with Ryan and Luke winning the sprint and feature race for McLaren and Toro Rosso. Do you feel returning to Australia and Bahrain in Season 12, given that we are still on the F1 2019 platform, do you expect to see these Season 10 lap records being broken, or do you think they will remain?
Well, from what I've seen in terms of pace, particularly for Australia, I do see a very high possibility that the lap record in Australia will be broken, which stands now currently as a 21 flat. So some of the practice I've undertaken, and I'm in my predictions of the pace of some of the others, I definitely see that one being broken. And I think it'd be broken quite substantially. Could see that be broken by at least half a second, I'd say, at least.
It's a big call, but I think I think you're right. I think there's definitely been an improvement in the chassis, but I think also as a driver, not only you or me or Ryan, but everyone collectively has grown over the course of a season, and then to return under that same format of game, I think the pace will be a lot higher this season coming. So we're going to, I know everyone's been edging out for the weather draft for Australia and Bahrain, and I can finally announce that we will be drafting the weather right now for the Australian Grand Prix and for the Bahrain Grand Prix. So the format is simple. Got practice, quali, sprint race and feature race, and there'll be 2 boxes, 2 weather allocations for each session. which I will draw out at random, and we may get the same, we may get mixed up weather. And the reason behind this, rather than going dynamic, which a couple of drivers in the paddock were brought up overnight when it was announced that there would be a weather draft, is, like, I'm sure you agree with me, Brandon, that I think dynamic weather is fantastic for unpredictability, and the guys that are able to adapt really quickly to changing conditions and stuff like that, they will do well. As a F1OWC administrator, like, we need to not only look out for those individuals, but we also need to take into consideration everyone in the paddock. So, say, Austin or Oscar or yourself, who may only have, an hour or so before the race to do some practice. You want to know that they're practicing for that weather and that they're not doing dry practice and rocking up to a wet race with no practice. And, then they run the risk of running into turn one and wiping out, Ryan Lowe, who's done 300 practice laps already. Ends his race, and it's just kind of balancing out that parity between the guys that can adapt well and the guys that just want to practice for those conditions. What are your thoughts on the weather draft?
I think it's a good opportunity to cater for everyone. Like you said, I think it's our responsibility as admins to make sure that we're looking out for everyone as a whole, and also take into account everyone's different circumstances. So, like you said, obviously, some people have more time to practice than others, and particularly the people who are quick, are able to get to grips with things a bit quicker. But at the same time, we have others of very different skill levels who, don't have as much time, and we need to make sure that, in the time that they do have, they have a bit more idea of,
what they're going into.
Yeah, what's to be expected.
Yeah, alright, so we're going to go into the draft. So for practice, the 30-minute practice for the Australian Grand Prix, the first weather allocation will be heavy rain for the start of practice.
Okay. That's an interesting one.
And then it will go into light rain.
Oh.
So heavy rain to light rain, 30-minute practice for the Australian Grand Prix.
Yep.
Now to qualifying. We'll start as overcast. And will remain overcast.
Okay.
So overcast qualifying. So that'd be good if you want to get the faster lap. Obviously, it's not the optimal conditions, but
Still be dry.
it'll still be dry, and hopefully block out some of that sun glare. All right. So the start of the sprint race will be light rain for the start of the sprint race. I think the last wet weather Australian Grand Prix we had was in season 3. And the sprint race will finish in heavy rain.
Oh, shout out to those people who love rain.
Pressure's on Steve Shadlow. Alright, now for the reverse grid feature race, we'll start clear.
Okay.
Like clear weathers for you, Ryan Lowe. And the feature race will finish with light cloud. So the reverse grid will be dry, fellas. So do you just want to read back through those weather allocations for the Australian Grand Prix, Brandon?
Yep. Okay, so for practice, we have heavy rain transitioning into light rain, which it'll end in light rain.
Yep.
For qualifying, it'll stay overcast for the whole of the session.
Yep.
For the sprint race, it will start in light rain and end in heavy rain.
It's going to be interesting, that one.
Oh yeah, definitely. I could see the possibility of seeing some mixed results if people are not adequately equipped for it. And for the feature race, we have the race starting in clear conditions and ending in light cloud.
Beautiful. I think that's an interesting mix of, variable conditions of wet weather in practice. Obviously, dry running in qualifying, though overcast, and light rain to heavy rain in the sprint race, and then clear to light cloud in the feature race. I think that's a good balance. To me, that if I was to look at that as a forecast, going from rain to overcast to rain in the one day, if we were still running the 2-day event, the second day's clear, that looks like a proper forecast for me. But as Ryan Lowe has mentioned in the comments, Bahrain, it's in the desert, has to be dry, surely. Do we potentially sit on the brink of making history with the first ever wet weather Bahrain Grand Prix? Well, practice will start as light cloud.
Okay.
Keep in mind that the practice session at Bahrain is done in the day, in the afternoon, so it's not night conditions. And the Bahrain practice session will finish heavy rain.
Heavy rain.
I think from memory, I think we did have a practice session where it did rain, or was that when we held winter testing? I think we came to Bahrain one year, winter testing.
I believe there was one session there. I'm not quite sure when it was, but there was rain.
Alright, so we are light cloud to heavy rain. Ryan is upset about his wet weather in Bahrain. So qualifying for the Bahrain Grand Prix will be clear for the first allocation.
Okay.
And it will transition into overcast.
So dry qualifying again.
Dry qualifying again. That's good for your lap record hunters. The sprint race will be start off light rain.
Oh dear.
Light rain start to the sprint race, which is different under lights.
This can be interesting in terms of visibility.
Yeah,
Especially,
well, we've raced
those
Singapore.
running in, those who may be running in cockpit cam.
Yeah, that's right. I'm talking to you, Shannon Mortlock. Get out of it. All right, so we're up to feature race. We'll start.
So sprint race starts in light cloud.
Light rain.
Light
and
rain.
goes into overcast.
Okay.
And the feature race will start as overcast.
Yep.
Really, it's night time, so it's just going to be dark with no stars. And the feature race will finish in light rain.
Yeah.
So
it's just backwards of the sprint race.
Pretty much. Do you want to run through that weather format for the Bahrain Grand Prix?
Okay, so for the Bahrain Grand Prix, for practice, we'll start in light cloud and end in heavy rain. For qualifying, we have the conditions starting in clear conditions and ending in overcast conditions. For the sprint race, we'll start in light rain, end in overcast conditions. And for the feature race, we'll start overcast and end in light rain conditions.
I think that feature race is going to be really important because you think the guys that have won a sprint race, the fast guys, will be starting at the back and they're going to probably have maybe 10 minutes, 12 minutes to get as far in front of everyone as they can on the dry tyres before it transitions into light rain. And then I really think the Bahrain Grand Prix is going to be mental. People are not accustomed to running wet weather around the Bahrain International Circuit, where we have held wet weather races in Australia before. So I think that will definitely be one to watch. Good thing I think to take out of that is both practice sessions for Australia and Bahrain have some kind of wet weather in them, which is good because obviously in Australia we've got rain in the sprint race, and then in Bahrain we've got a bit of rain in both of them. So I think people will have enough time to get accustomed to running in tricky conditions. What's your take on the draft?
It's definitely interesting, especially for Bahrain. Like you said, I don't think anyone will be 100% prepared for rain in the desert. I think myself included.
I mean, it does rain in Bahrain. Obviously, the time that Formula One goes there during the year, it traditionally doesn't rain. But in some of the practice sessions and stuff on the telecast, like there is always that threat, but it just never comes.
So I
we're
think
going to bend the rules a little bit.
I think it's definitely going to be interesting. I think everyone will be putting in some solid practice in the wet now and getting an idea of what the car feels like in the wet. And we have a full wet race for the sprint race in Australia. So
to kick things off. So to kick off, your season 12 campaign, it's going to be light rain to heavy rain after a wet practice, dry qualifying, wet race, and then a dry feature race. So it's going to be, if you can play your cards right, could be on track to picking up some good points finishes in both of those rounds.
I said the opportunity for some mixed results, I believe. I think could see some surprise results.
Well, like Toro Rosso coming through to get the win.
I'll leave that up to you.
No, I didn't say me. I'll say Shannon Mortlock.
I know. You never know. It could be you.
I know my bad luck at Australia, and I'm going to stick by it. Alright, so third topic of the night. We are 40 minutes into the podcast. We're going to just brush loosely over the rules and regulations of the series. Now, we had a couple of new guys join towards the end of the season. Harry Ryan, Ben Matchett, and Mitchell Haywood. Just to remind you guys that if you're in a practice session or in qualifying, please refrain from retiring out on track once you've done your hot lap. Please, put it back into fuel saving mode, putt round, go back into pits, and then retire in the pit lane, because we don't run ghosting, and if there are people behind you still on hot laps, your ghost car will get in the way and impede other people, which will result in that individual getting a penalty. So if you could please just be mindful of that. What else we got? If you got any incidents or issues while in the race, obviously we encourage drivers to record or stream their races for Brandon and myself to look through, but also for any incident reviews. If you do have any issues or concerns, or if you feel that someone may bring footage against you and you want to cover yourself, just send it to the admins. Don't send it in the group chat, especially if people are a bit hot under the collar, or what's in the footage may be a little bit controversial and it may spark some unnecessary to and fro in the group chat. So that's probably my main key points. Is there anything you wanted to add, Brandon, or build on?
I think for the most part that's the two main points we needed to cover.
Yeah.
I think the race that we've been seeing so far has shown that everyone has the racecraft within them, to keep it clean on track, and just I guess just a friendly reminder to you that maintain the respect on track.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, especially, now that we have some wet weather races coming up, just make sure that you know, keep it clean. And, if you need to compromise yourself for a couple of extra tenths, you lose a couple of extra tenths, maybe you need to think about, losing those extra tenths instead of going for some bold moves, that may cost yourself or some others, some
Well,
positions in
yeah,
the race.
I think that's right. I think, look, at the end of the day, performance and pace varies between the front of the grid and the back of the grid, and that happens in every form of motorsport. Ultimately, you have an idea of who you're battling. So ultimately, if there's cars coming up behind you under blue flags, or even if it is for position, if you know that that person is probably most likely going to get past you, don't compromise yourself in a wet weather race, and risk damaging yourself, damaging another competitor, running off the track to let people pass under blue flags. Just be vigilant of one, who you're racing and who's around you, but also I think what's important, which we saw quite a few times this year, with some of the drivers down the back end of the grid, is people running off the circuit to get out of the way of blue flags. Like, to me, you lift off, the other car comes through, you pick up the pace. Don't continue to drive full pelt into the corner and expect the other car to get past you quickly, because if you're doing 300 k's and they're only doing 310, they're not going to pass you that fast. So you do need to lift off substantially for that car to get past, I think. But overall, I think everyone knows how to go racing and race well.
Yeah, that's right.
We're going to segue a little bit onto sponsorship and potential prize pool for maybe season 12 or season 13, when we hopefully go on to F1 2020. Obviously, for the people that know me, I own a registered graphic and design business, Five Lights Graphic and Design, which I work with Shannon Mortlock on, does some work for me. We're looking obviously to come back on as a title sponsor for the F1OWC. One, makes F1OWC look a bit more better by having a title sponsor. Obviously, it's good for me from a business point by having a platform to promote. In addition, I'm having some talks with a car wrap and printing service business called Zavita, to potentially print up some basically milestone certificates for people that achieve or reach certain milestones, 3,000 career points, 100 Grand Prix races, 50 podiums, etc., etc., etc. Obviously championships as well. Obviously stickers and other stuff to obviously support the F1OWC from a promotion point, but also I've been talking with a small brand or business in Sydney here called Sim Racing Australia, and they obviously run and manufacture affordable, basically sim seats, racing rigs. I got my seat through them. I think it's pretty good. I think it's a very good entry level seat frame. Come with a monitor mount, which I put my 47-inch TV on. Holds the weight, does the job. The quality is really good. So we're looking at potentially pairing up with those guys for season 12 or 13, and potentially offering a sim seat as the championship prize for that winning season. So obviously there's a lot of interesting things to talk over, work out from a promotions point of view for the F1OWC, in terms of how we want to grow the series publicly. Obviously the one thing that we don't have that other series do is obviously a dedicated commentator team, which is something that you and I, Brandon, have been talking about for a while. But ultimately we can't just have some some random person come in and commentate. I'm sure they'll do a good job, but they don't have that history of what the F1OWC is, who the drivers are, races and milestones and events that have played on way back to season 1. So we've got to make sure that whoever we do get on as commentators would be there for the long haul and would be there to commentate and represent the F1OWC professionally, which is something we haven't been able to fill at this point. But I think commentating responsibilities aside, I think if we can continue to grow our social media presence with clean racing, good community of drivers, I think naturally these steps that have been taken in the background will help elevate the series up the higher ranks with AOR, ASR, etc., etc. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it'd be great to reach a point where we have some people coming in and or we find that certain team or even individual who can commentate on the series and bring that extra level of excitement to people who may want to view or watch the series without participating in it. So yeah, I'm excited to get to that next step. Obviously we've had discussions for a while now, just looking to to do it in the right sort of way. So
well, that's right. Yeah. If we jump too early on going, hey, this person that walks in the door can be our commentators, and it doesn't work, to then be trying to promote ourselves and then backflipping through different commentators doesn't look too good. So we need to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row before we execute something as major as that. Yeah, I think the last topic on our criteria for tonight is our predictions for the Australian Grand Prix and for the Bahrain Grand Prix. Obviously, now that we've had the weather forecast thrown in there, it's a massive curveball. Pole position for Australia. On current face value of the drivers on the grid, who's your
pole
pick?
position?
Pole position.
I think we're going to take Shannon on this one.
Yeah, it's definitely a good opportunity to back him. He had the pole position last season as well, didn't he?
Yeah, I believe he did, or he was close to it. If he didn't get it, I know he's quite strong on this track, so I'm looking to see him do well.
So. I think Ryan Lowe might be able to get the job done for the first pole position in Australia. For McLaren, I think he's done a lot of practice in the simulator ahead of the weekend, so I think he will be my pick for the pole position. As for the heavy rain sprint race, to pick the winner, it's difficult, but I reckon we could see either. I reckon Fletcher can get on the podium. Fletcher or Steve can get on the podium in the sprint race.
Interesting. I was going to go ahead and say that Mitchell could potentially, have a good race. It'd be interesting to see. Yeah, Mitchell Collin. I think he has the opportunity to do well.
Well, returning to Williams for the first time since since his debut, season 2. Obviously, he won the championship with them. It'd be good.
Yeah, I think it might give him the extra level of motivation to put in more practice, and I believe he may have, put in more practice than he has been, especially in last season. So
well, it was interesting because in season 2 he debuted in Malaysia, so he missed the season opener in Australia. The first Australian Grand Prix he did in season 3 was wet, so but ultimately that ended in heartbreak because we both crashed into each other at turn 1. So we'll overlook the details on that. That's not a good season that I like to reflect on. Feature race, dry conditions. Who's your pick? Obviously 25%. It's not going to be 50% races anymore. So patience and endurance isn't going to be as important as, as Kurt Dunn would say, just licking it and sending it.
Hmm. In terms of the race winner, in dry conditions, I could definitely see the likes of Ryan getting up there, Ryan Lowe, getting up there and taking the win. I'd like to hope that I'm close, but also I could definitely see, from what I've seen, in the sort of practice we've done, Kurt Dunn, getting on the podium or potentially, battling for that win.
Yeah, that's right. He's definitely made some big strides in his performance over the past, season and a half. Me personally, I think I'd match you on that and say Ryan Lowe would be the favourite to walk away with the Australian Grand Prix feature. Potentially, do I say after a retirement in the sprint race in the wet? Question marks over that response. I won't dig too much into that or apply too much pressure on him to retire from the first race. But that is my prediction. Though Shannon Mortlock always been fast, but traditionally struggles to execute when it's needed most. He's always been strong in 25% races. Now we've got a season of 25% races. Is this the year of Shannon Mortlock?
It could be, very much could be. And, I think with a fresh season and a reset, I think he's been doing a lot of work, especially in the back end of, season 11 to get ready for this season. So I think he's pretty well prepared to start it, strong. And as the records do state, 25% races is where his hunting ground is, where he, does the best, where he banks the most points for himself.
That's right. I think all of his race wins last season were in the sprint races, if I'm not mistaken. So it'd be good to see him be able to execute that and get a couple more onto his tally. Well, we're moving on to Bahrain for our predictions. Qualifying in the clear, I think, as history's kind of suggested, I think Oscar Grant will be the favourite to take out the pole position in Bahrain.
Yeah, I was going to match you on that one, but if I had to pick someone else, that's a tricky one, Bahrain.
He was the pole sitter last season, Oscar.
He definitely was. I think. I think I can't. I can't really think of. Someone who could be as strong as Oscar is, especially at Bahrain.
Sprint race.
I think I'm gonna have to match you on that one.
No, I think it's a sensible choice. Moving on to the sprint race. Obviously, starting in light rain. We know Oscar is really good. Let's say hypothetically he gets the pole position. Oscar's traditionally really good in the wet conditions. That was proven in the Hockenheim race last season. I think from the front row, I think Oscar can convert that because he's starting on the wet tyres. Obviously, you're not bound by using both dry compound tyres there, so he could, soft it to the end if he really wanted to. I reckon Oscar Grant for the sprint race would be my pick.
Yeah, I think Shannon has his potential because I know he does well in the wet. I think he could have a good race if he qualifies well. If he can get himself on the front row or even get pole, I think if he can get himself next to Oscar, if Oscar does clinch the pole, to put himself in the best position to win. I know he does do well in the wet, so I think I'll back him.
First wet race at Bahrain. Are we expecting carnage into turn one?
Well, turn one's one of those, it's one of those tricky corners because it kind of comes back. It's very tight. Yeah, it comes back on itself slightly, and it's a very tight corner. So especially in the wet, I think there's a very high possibility that someone may outbrake themselves.
Well, I think turn two is probably even more trickier than turn one because turn one you're breaking a straight line, but getting that acceleration out of turn one through turn two, which in the dry is flat. For those guys that are running, no ABS and no traction control and stuff like that, getting that power deployment down and not dumping it on the curbing there is going to be very crucial. And if Oscar's starting from the front row, with the likes of yourself and Shannon and Ryan and all that around him, who knows what's going to happen at the start of that sprint race.
Well, yeah, could go anyway, really. Just because you're at the front, that doesn't mean you could be at the front at the end of the lap. So, especially after the first 3 corners, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
So we're going to
someone
go...
could run deep. Someone could potentially, end up out, take a few positions at the start. You just don't know.
Yeah, that's right. We'll get a good start. I think the guys that run medium traction and full traction will get the initial advantage off the line in the wet race. Obviously they're going to be handicapped a little bit in terms of their mid-corner speed as that traction bites in on them compared to the guys that run no TC, but I think it's just going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. And moving into the feature race, starting in the dry, overcast, going into light rain. What's your take on the feature race for the Bahrain Grand Prix?
For the feature race, I know Kurt picked up a podium in Bahrain last season. Pretty sure that was in the feature race, if I'm certain. I think he has the opportunity to do well. But also, it's hard not to back Ryan. I think his performances from the back of the grid are quite strong. So I expect him to see him, if not winning, being on the podium. So
yeah, absolutely. I think the way that the guys are able to get some practice down in these conditions, it's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out. I think we're going to be in for a very exciting season 12 of the F1OWC Championship. And I think that pretty much wraps us up for the evening. So I'd just like to thank everyone for tuning in, and I hope you are either happy about the weather forecast or upset. That's how it is. I actually really look forward to experiencing wet weather at Bahrain. Obviously, it's a little bit arcade, as it's not really common to rain in the desert as much as we would probably like, but I think it's going to be really good. So best of luck tomorrow, Brandon, and we will see you guys all again on Friday for the Friday podcast.
Thank you.